Good morning and welcome to Moments with Melinda. I am your host, Melinda Moulton, and I have with me Nikhil Goyal. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you on my show. I have admired you from afar for a long time, and I'm so glad that I get to share you with my viewers. Let me tell them a little bit about you. Nikhil Goyal is a sociologist, educator, policymaker, activist, author, and candidate for the Vermont Senate. He was a Catherine Davis Fellow for Peace at Middlebury College, and Nikhil is running as a Democratic progressive for the Vermont Senate. Is that correct?
You got it.
All right, so let's begin at the beginning. Nikhil, talk to us about your early life growing up on Long Island.
So my parents came to this country from India in the 80s, 90s, and they settled in Queens in a one-bedroom apartment. And when they decided that they were going to have children, they ended up moving out to Long Island. And I grew up, my sister and I, on Long Island in Hicksville, a small middle-class town, and went to Bethpage schools. It was a small part of Hicksville that where the kids were bused to Bethpage, where the schools were a little bit better funded and higher quality. And it was a really wonderful childhood. I had access to so many resources, went to the library every week with my mother, really got a love for reading from a young age. Was very, very big fan of Harry Potter, and that really immersed me into literature and brought me to other really important pursuits and gave me the confidence as a learner, as a thinker, and to do other things in life. And so I got a really great public education, certainly accompanied by the support of my parents and family. So I'm very grateful for that. And I also would mention that I never really had to worry about where I was going to get my next meal or where I was going to put my head down at night. And those are things that you don't really think about necessarily consciously as a child if you have those basic dignities and rights. But as I got older and I began to spend some time in India, visiting my grandparents, learning about poverty and economic insecurity in this country, I began to realize how lucky I was with the resources that I had as a child, and how, frankly, many other people in this country around the world do not have those basic dignities and rights. And that became part of my political consciousness to do something about those inequities and
which
inequalities.
which we are going to dig in big time in our time together. Thank you for sharing that. So, who do you believe had the greatest influence on you as a young boy to follow this life path that you have chosen?
When I was in high school, I began to read the New York Times very religiously, and one of my favorite sections was the opinion section. And every week I'd read David Brooks and Thomas Friedman and Paul Krugman, and they really shaped a lot of my thinking about issues. And in school, I was on the speech and debate team, and I competed in extemporaneous speaking, and that I think was probably one of the most seminal experiences I had because being able to craft an argument, defend oneself, speak before an audience, and try to convince them about where you stand on an issue. I think that those skills, that knowledge, those abilities have been the foundation of a lot of the work I do today. And so I really attribute some of my work and the knowledge I have today to my teachers in high school, to the mentors I had during that time, and then to the many people, the writers that I had read growing up, who
Your-
really gave me the language to think about the world in a more concrete way.
So, were your parents into social justice?
Not particularly. We would talk about political issues, but they weren't necessarily very engaged in politics per se. What was interesting is my grandmother, my late grandmother, my mother's mother, she was very politically active as growing up in India. She was involved with setting up healthcare clinics, particularly birth control clinics for women. Um, in India. She was also very involved in other community organizing. She would march with some of the people who had been involved in the freedom struggle against the British Empire. She was a little bit too young for that, but she supported many of those folks later
You're,
on. And I learned really sadly that when she got married, she ended up having to drop a lot of those activities and focus more on household responsibilities. Um, and it saddens me a lot because of, I wonder what might have been had she continued in those pursuits because it really was so remarkable as a woman growing up in the 1950s and 60s in India um, when it still a very but even more so then a deeply hyper patriarchal society and to speak your mind to work with the poor work with working class people in their struggles I think that was just absolutely profound so um, I think I carry some of that legacy
there
when
you
I go.
are. Yes, you have the DNA of your grandmother. Is she still alive?
No, she passed
Oh,
a
I'm
few years
sorry.
ago.
I'm sorry.
And but I still certainly remember her fondly.
Well, she,
And the memories I had spending time with her in India growing up.
she must have been so proud of you. Now, you attended Goddard College and you received your PhD at the University of Cambridge in England. Talk to us about this time in your life and how it helped to direct you into your future passions.
So Goddard had a major influence on me. I had the opportunity to work very closely with Robert Buchanan, one of the faculty members there, and Eva Swidler in my program. I did individualized studies at Goddard College, which is quite funny if you think about it, because Goddard is already hyper self-directed learning, and so add in individualized studies gives you a taste uh, of 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 how I was able to essentially design my own curriculum and learning path. I thought it was great preparation for graduate school because I worked with these professors, created a research plan, went out and did and conducted research on education and poverty um, and youth, and was able to get feedback and mentorship on this research and be guided on books to read, on people to talk to, on theories to examine. So I thought it was a fabulous education and it gave me a great grounding. And then I went off to the University of Cambridge in England, which is also which has similarities to Goddard in that the graduate experience is also very self-directed, and then you work with a professor on your graduate studies and on the books you read, on the theories and on the scope of your study, which was sociology of education, poverty, and incarceration. And I'll just say one thing, which is that Goddard does not offer grades, and so I was very lucky that my professor Joanne Dillabo, who ultimately she had vouched for me in the admissions process, even though I didn't have a grade. So it's something I'm very indebted to her
Okay.
for that because it's tough to apply to a school like Cambridge without having a GPA.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on that. You were also educated, I believe, at the University of Vermont, Wesleyan University, and New York University. So you are a
I
deep,
taught there. I taught at
you
those
taught
institutions.
there. You
Yes,
taught
I
there.
taught there.
You taught there. Okay, so you taught at University of Vermont, Wesleyan University, and New York University. But you are a deeply learned man, even though you're early in your life, you were not necessarily an inspired student. Share with us what you gleaned from this higher education that you did not glean during your early years.
Hmm. I think what Goddard and Cambridge gave me was the freedom to learn as I wished. It allowed me the autonomy to seek out knowledge on my own terms. And that's something I think was not offered to me in high school. It was a very regimented, structured curriculum. I often sought out speech and debate and cross-country running and other extracurricular activities as a way to take back control, to find areas where I could have more ownership over my educational experiences. I often found myself very bored and disengaged in school. And I felt that the purpose of education was not simply to get good grades and score high in the SAT and then go off to a prestigious college or university. I thought that was a very distorted aim of education. That education, the point of it is to develop your critical consciousness, to reflect on the world, to intervene in injustice and help repair suffering and inequality. And I think that's been my philosophy about education since that time. That education is not a static operation, as Paulo Freire would describe it. It is a deeply community-based interventionist methodology where you are trying to seek out knowledge, work within a community, and hopefully do some good with the knowledge that you have acquired. Because otherwise, what is the point? What is the point of
Here,
being
here.
here? What is the point of operating if you're not actually trying to make an impact and improve people's lives, especially those who have been born into situations where you have enormous opportunity. You are to me, it's important that you spread that opportunity to more and more people.
Here, here. So early on in your education, you began to research the public education system and progressive counterparts to our education. And from this research, you wrote One Size Does Not Fit All, a student's assessment of school, which was published in 2012 when you were just 17 years old. Forbes and the Washington Post. Now, to my viewers, I want you to listen to this. Forbes and the Washington Post praised your book. So, talk to us about what inspired you and why you wrote this book, and is it still relevant today? And if so, why?
Yeah, it grew out of my frustration with education, or at least my schooling experiences. And at first, it was a passion project where I just wanted to learn about the subject. I began to read about it extensively. I was 14, 15 when I started this, and then it evolved into actually thinking about this could be a writing project. This could be a book. And I did a lot. I did essentially. Had a lot of made a lot of cold emails to folks around the world whose writing and work I had appreciated, and asked them, could I ask you a few questions for 20, 30 minutes? And most people replied and were very happy to do that, and I'm grateful for that. And that was a book project that had a lot of that came out of a lot of teenage angst, I would say. And I think there's pieces that are relevant, pieces that I probably would not be quoting today. But I think to me, it was an expression of both the frustration I held, but also a hope of a different system for children. And I think that's what I think readers ultimately got from that. That this is these are the thoughts and the ideas of a 16, 17-year-old, and young people should be taken seriously in our education reform conversation.
Absolutely. And I think there should be a young person on every board in this country. Um,
I strongly agree with that.
I think
Yes.
you and I probably have, this is going to be a mind meld, an interview of mind meld. So in 2016, while at Goddard, you wrote Schools on Trial, How Freedom and Creativity Can Fix Our Educational Malpractice. Talk to us about this work.
So this is a project that I had worked on when I was at Goddard. I wanted to understand the history of the American progressive education movement and where it stood today. I had read A.S. Neal's very famous treatise, Summerhill, which came out in I think 1960, and that book had a major influence on American public education. We had millions of people read that book. Many educators I speak to today actually point to that book as one of the reasons they got into teaching in the first place. And that book helped inspire the free school movement. And Vermont actually historically has been at the epicenter of that, where you had just ordinary people who were interested in education, setting up free and democratic schools rooted in self-determination and self-directed learning and community as a classroom. And they thought that this is a better way to educate children than simply chaining a kid to a desk for 7 hours a day and engaging in direct instruction. And so I wanted to trace that history and understand, how do these schools fare today? Are there any that exist, and how do they operate? And so went around the country to a couple cities. I went to Philly, I went to Boston, San Francisco, and I visited a number of these schools that some of them had existed from way back then, and others had been established more recently. And tried to understand what are the lessons they can teach to the larger public education system, and where their advantages and their shortcomings. And so that's what I wanted to understand. And I also try to dovetail that analysis with an examination of the American corporate school reform movement, which has been I'd say established for the past 3 to 4 decades. School privatization, charter schools, vouchers, um, value-added teacher evaluations. The idea that education is not a public good, but that it's a commodity that private actors should be intervening in the so-called marketplace, and providing school choice and other options for children. And so I wanted to understand that movement because as I was growing up, there had been a number of cities in the U.S., Chicago, Philadelphia, New York City, and others that had been closing dozens of schools, and oftentimes laying off thousands of teachers. And so this agenda of austerity was very front of mind, and I wanted to understand one had what was this doing to our working class communities, particularly very, very low income communities. What was this doing to children and educators? And how do we actually provide a counter agenda and narrative for an equitable, democratic, and child-centered public education system? So those are the questions I began to wrestle with and interrogate through my research.
Fascinating, fascinating. So now you were a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders. Now, have you read Dan Chasen's book on Bernie? And this was a period of time before you were born. And what did you think of the book and of Bernie's early rise to notoriety as the people's politician? And talk to us about your time with Bernie and the bill, and also talk a little bit about the Build Back Better legislation, which was pulled by Joe Manchin. That's a lot, but let's see if we can do that succinctly. But
It's a great question.
thank you.
Senator Sanders has been a longtime inspiration for me. When he ran for president back in 2015, his campaign inspired me to get more involved in politics, like millions of others. He put into language a lot of the ideas and frustrations I had with American politics, and I'd come of age during the Obama administration, and I saw at times where the administration did not serve working people. And Bernie was able to show that corporate power and the domination of corporate interests erodes our freedoms and our democracy. And that simple, elegant explanation helped me understand a lot of what was at stake in our country at the time. And so I got involved with the campaign. I volunteered for it. Then got more involved in 2020, was a surrogate in New Hampshire and helped out on the policy platform. And I always felt so proud of that campaign and everything that it stood for. Because it was a shot in the arm. It was, I think I look back at those two campaigns and they were so ahead of Bernie was so ahead of his time. And had, I think what really crystallized that was watching the inauguration in 2020, 2025 and when you saw that row of billionaires just stand behind the president, and people are like, oh, actually, maybe we do have a problem with excess billionaire power in this country. Maybe we ought to tax billionaires a little bit more and make sure that we may not have as many billionaires. And I think you saw that reckoning that Bernie was so far ahead of his time, and we're reaping the consequences for the failure of this country to elect him. So I in 2021, I had just finished my PhD, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I had been just trying to take a break from my research for the first time in years. And I got a call from Senator Sanders as chief of staff, asking if I'd consider working for him, and it was a very easy answer. And I ended up working on the Senate Budget Committee and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee as a senior policy advisor on education and children. And one of the things I worked on, as you pointed out, was Build Back Better. Um, it was really remarkable to be involved as a staffer on that legislation because I often looked back and revisited some of the writings of the staffers who worked on the New Deal and the Great Society, and they had been uh, they had faced such enormous challenges. The titanic weight of history on their shoulders. With the New Deal, it was the Great Depression. With the Great Society, it was the end of the Jim Crow order and the collapse of the post-war economic order, and mass poverty and immiseration. They were facing enormous challenges, and we were in a similar situation with the coronavirus pandemic. Millions of people out of work, unemployed, uh, uh, living off of just a little bit of income, have lost their health insurance. It was a dire state of affairs, and so I had a chance to work on the childcare, preschool, child tax credit, and higher education programs in that bill. We had just introduced the College for All Act a few weeks before we got to work on Build Back Better, and so we really fought very hard for tuition-free public college. Initially, we wanted to get 2 and 4 year institutions covered, and then eventually it was whittled down to community college, and then, as you know,
Man,
Senator
you
Manchin
mean pulled the plug,
killed the
damn it.
program.
So,
So.
so let's move on to your latest book. It was released in 2023, and it is Live to See the Day, Coming of Age in America, Coming of Age in American Poverty, which was named, I mean, this blows my mind. I mean, this book of yours was named the best book of 2023 by the New Yorker. I mean, that's extraordinary credentials. Talk to us about this book.
So this book is a product of many years of ethnographic fieldwork and research. I'm fully indebted to the young people and families that made up this book, that gave me their time, years of their lives, to allow me to follow them, to understand their experiences, and depict their struggles in a very granular, intimate way. I was interested in examining the high school dropout crisis, and I reached out to a friend named Andrew Frischman, who runs an organization called Big Picture Learning, which is a network of public progressive schools around the country. And I'd asked him to suggest a few schools for me to visit, and he said, "You should go visit one of our schools in Philadelphia, El Centro de Estudiantes." And El Centro is an alternative last chance high school that works with kids who had dropped out. At the time, it was in Kensington, the poorest neighborhood of Philadelphia. It was right in the middle of the largest open air drug market on the East Coast. And I began to spend some time interviewing the students and the teachers. And I thought I was going to write an article about the school, but then it evolved into a much larger project when I went off to graduate school. And I ended up interviewing, hundreds of kids at El Centro, in the neighborhood, at other schools and GED centers. And they brought me into their lives. They introduced me to their parents and their friends and their family members. I hung out on the drug corners, went to restaurants and to court. I went to the juvenile facility in Philadelphia. I really tried to immerse myself in every institution that these young people had encountered or dealt with in their lives. And what the book tries to do is it's a part history, part ethnography, really understanding how do we arrive at the conditions in this neighborhood and in the lives of these children, and how do we get out of this mess? How do we provide uh, universal social economic rights so that nobody lives in poverty, nobody goes unhoused, nobody is uneducated, and nobody lacks basic care and support. And those are the questions I began to wrestle with in this book. It was really set in the period of welfare reform, of hyper incarceration, of educational privatization, and so undergirding the lives of these kids were these deep historical processes and and
Limitations.
situations and lived,
Yeah,
yeah, lived experiences. And so that's what I brought both together, the individual experiences, the agency of their lives with social structure and history, and told that story in
amazing. So,
interconnected
so to
ways.
my viewers, you can pick up Live to See the Day, Coming of Age in American Poverty, which was named the best book of 2023 by The New Yorker.
A book of the not
A,
the book.
well, it was a book, but
Yes,
still
I just want to.
a
There's
book.
other
Okay.
books that were
Okay, so it
mentioned
was
as well.
named as one of the best books,
Yes,
but still, that's remarkable. And by the way, I'm sure you can pick it up at Phoenix Books,
yes, you
shop
can.
local. So talk to us. So let's move on from this to the whole movement, the national nonprofit Big Picture Learning, which you have mentioned often, and it's a program that you admire. Talk to us a little bit about that program.
Yeah, so at El Centro, it was wedded to the big picture model of learning by doing. Essentially, John Dewey's dictum applied in practice. The school was set up into advisories, small cohorts where this group of students often stayed with that advisor slash teacher throughout the day. There was restorative specialists throughout the school, counselors on every floor, very low class sizes, so people were known by their peers and adults in the building. There was democratic process. They had school meetings. Kids would often be deeply involved in the operation of the school. I've been to so many schools now throughout my research, and it's very easy for me to tell within often an hour of being at a school whether it is a place where there's genuine love and respect and learning happening.
How do you
And I
tell that? How do you tell that? How do you tell that?
You
By the
tell
look.
that by how the children are behaving.
There you
You,
go.
you that's the way you are they happy? Are they engaged? Do they and the way they talk to their teachers. Is there a sense of deep authority or is there mutual reciprocity and respect? And I think you can those interactions are so critical because for these kids, they've gone through hell. They've lived in deep poverty. Been exposed to extreme levels of violence, and whether it's gun violence or domestic violence, they are often deprived of basic resources. They are often coming to school hungry. They are dealing with challenges that no child should have to endure. And so school should be at least a place where children feel respected and feel safe and nurtured.
And
And
often it's
they
not.
don't
And
need
yeah.
they don't need bullying. They don't need authoritarian kind of bossing around. They just need love. And I think what the teachers at El Centro showed just by simply calling each other by their first names or checking up on them or having restorative circles and showing them we're here for you. You are going to make mistakes, but we're going to go through a restorative process when you make mistakes so that you acknowledge the harm and we you take accountability and you work towards something better. There were kids who there was one child who started a fire in a school bathroom at El Centro. And in any other school, that child would have been arrested and sent to court, and their life would have been really marred from that incident. But instead, that child went through an intensive restorative process and with their parents and the school and other students, and they understood what the harm they had done. Because the reality is, kids are going to do bad things. They're children. They're immature. They're not fully developmentally there yet. And it's the job of educators and our adults to recognize that children deserve not just respect, but opportunities to do better and reform
Here,
in a
here.
holistic and restorative way. And that's what I think the beauty of the big picture model is, that it's about trust and agency, and it's about helping young people achieve what they want to achieve in life, whether that's college or career. Or whatever else down the road. So I know there's been a lot of great examples of big picture around the country. I know South Burlington has had a program. I'm not sure if it is closed since, but to me, it is just
I think
the
I think I think Mount Mansfield, where my granddaughter goes, does a good job with this. So we're gonna move on because I have about 20 pages here for you. So you have said that Vermont is a cradle for social democracy. I agree with you. I also want you to talk briefly about the education program you helped spearhead that was tuition free for incarcerated people and correctional staff in all Vermont prisons. Talk to us about that briefly.
So I had the opportunity to teach in prison through New York University, starting in 2018, and it was one of the most seminal learning experiences I've ever had teaching in prison. The students I worked with, the education that was imparted, learning from each other in that classroom, and from that, I knew that if I had any power later on in life to expand higher education in a correctional facility, I had to take advantage of that. And so when I started working for Senator Sanders, earmarks, congressionally directed spending came back to the U.S. Senate, and I we had the opportunity to propose ideas to the senator, and I really wanted to bring something similar to Vermont. And the Community College of Vermont had been involved with the Department of Corrections on a sort of pilot project at one of the prisons with community college, and so that was a great foundation, but it hadn't really gone beyond that, and so we were able to work with the Community College of Vermont, the Corrections Union, and the Department of Corrections to put together a proposal that would provide tuition-free community college for both the incarcerated population and the correctional staff. Because
Yeah.
what the senator recognized, and what I also saw working in prison, was that incarcerated students and correctional staff are often coming from the same socioeconomic background. They're often low income or working class. And they may not have had the same opportunities for higher education, and they deserve it just as everybody else does. And we know that recidivism is that college and prison is a surefire way to reduce recidivism. The Barred Prison Initiative, which I've worked with in the past, is probably the gold standard of college and prison, and they have recidivism rates of less than 4% if
Wow.
you complete a college degree. So I knew that this would be a way to both expand educational opportunity and reduce crime,
Mm.
and provide a great foundation for people leaving prison and returning to mainstream society. And then making sure that this program is politically durable, because if the correctional staff is bought in, then they are not going to oppose college for prisoners in that same way. So that program is now up and running. I am so proud
Wow.
of it. It is doing so well, and dozens of people have been, I think, positively impacted by the work of the educators and the staff in that program.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good for you. So, briefly, talk to us about your partnership with ACLU, where you led a coalition to support a Vermont raise the age juvenile justice law.
So Vermont was the first state to expand raise the age to young adults. We were the first state to allow 18-year-olds who are accused of less serious felonies and misdemeanors to be tried automatically in family court rather than adult criminal court. What the research has found is that recidivism rates um, for juvenile court are much, much lower than that of adult criminal court, because the juvenile courts are intensive in terms of support services. Each child that goes through that system has a clear program of support. Here are the services and opportunities that can get you on a better track. There's restorative justice. There's diversion. Um, there's mentorship. These are opportunities that are not often always available in the adult criminal system. And no wonder recidivism rates are much lower because you have that personalized anti-crime, anti-recidivism approach. So the ACLU has been fighting on this issue, fighting for this issue for a number of years. The 19-year-olds in Raise the Age has been delayed several times, and it came up last year because the pause was going to expire, and so we were fighting to actually finally implement the 19-year-old population. We saw enormous success with the 18-year-olds. We've seen delinquency filings go down uh, overall, even as we added a whole new age group to the data. And I've talked to a lawyer who really put into stark and vivid words just how powerful Raise the Age has been for some of her clients. People that would have gone and had a criminal adult record were treated in juvenile court, were able um, to recognize and admit the harm they had caused, make amends, and take accountability for their actions. And frankly, Governor Scott has been the biggest bottleneck to this. He has used baseless assertions to argue that this law is the reason we've had a spike in juvenile crime. There's not a shred of evidence to show that this is the case. This law has been extremely successful. It's anti-crime, it's anti-recidivism, and it's pro young people because it's allowing young people to get back on the right track and go on with the rest of their lives in a positive way.
Well, let's sit down with Governor Scott and have a conversation with him. I'd love to be in on that. So now I'm going to move on to your run for state senate because we're running out of time here. I want to talk about some of the issues that you're going to be dealing with should you be elected to the state senate. First, our education system and the bill that Governor Scott signed into law, laying the groundwork for the overhaul of our public school system. Now, you've come out against this. Talk to us why, and how would you structure our educational system? Because this is
Yeah.
going into effect, so it's not like I don't think we can reverse it at this point. So what are the stumbling blocks that you see?
So Act 73 was passed last summer, and the first thing the act did was set up a task force to examine the path forward and to propose new district lines. The task force did not propose new districts, but they did offer some really important recommendations that I think should be implemented immediately. They called for voluntary district mergers and shared services across districts, such as special education, transportation, and technology. Those are things that can be implemented tomorrow, over time, to actually bring down the costs. The problem with Act 73 is that it's not rooted in the biggest cost driver of property taxes in school budgets, and that is healthcare. Healthcare is the single biggest cost, single biggest driver of cost. It's now going
Healthcare,
to,
when you say healthcare, you mean healthcare insurance for the teachers?
yes, yeah, yeah.
Aha. Thank you for
and
clarifying.
and and employees, it's
Mhm.
the health costs are expected to hit 15-20% of school budgets. And in some districts, it's already gotten to that point. And we've also had a big challenge with the expiration of the American Rescue Plan dollars and the other COVID relief dollars, where school districts put some of that money into staffing, and that staffing, now that the money is expired, they've kept some of those staff. And so, the district's going to have to make some tough choices about where they are spending their dollars. And we've also added a lot of mental and behavioral health staff, understandably, because we need to help kids recover
Absolutely.
from COVID. Some of those services could be funded through the general fund as opposed to the education fund. But I think first and foremost, we've got to really address healthcare. That's the big elephant in the room.
But we're going to talk about that. I want to
Yeah,
bring that up.
sure.
But let me
And
just, yeah, go ahead.
and I can and so healthcare is one piece, but within, in terms of school consolidation and some of the reforms that are on the table, yes, do we need to find ways to trim the number of districts and supervisory units? Absolutely. There are ways where we can reduce numbers and find ways where more districts can merge and collaborate. And that's happening in some places in the state, and that should be ongoing. Should it be six districts or one large shaded district? No, I think that's not going to actually work. And frankly, the evidence is not there that this is going to reduce property taxes. And so that's something that I think we've got to actually keep in mind. What are the evidence-based solutions that are going to help reduce costs and make people's lives better without sacrificing the quality of public education?
Yeah.
That is another piece that has not been actually talked about, the quality of our public schools. Yes, do we need reforms? Do we need to invest more in literacy programs? Do we need to invest more in project-based learning and experiential learning and early college? Absolutely. And we should be talking about that. But the conversation has been dominated by the financing piece, and we've left out some of the other
Well,
critical.
that's an issue we're going to talk about. So I also want to talk to you about the housing for the homeless. and also for the middle class. I mean, that's a big issue. I mean, people cannot afford to buy a house in Vermont as property values have skyrocketed, and this impacts the ability then to inspire developers to build low-income housing. So, what is your solution to both of these issues that seem to impact one another? How do we make Vermont affordable, and how do we create more housing for the homeless?
It's a great question. I think we need housing at every tier. We need housing, we need luxury housing. We need middle class housing. We need lower income housing. It's all types of housing because one of the biggest problems is when you have a low housing supply, when renters go on the rental market, they have very few options and people can increase rents, and tenants are at the mercy of those few landlords. But if you have much more housing and there's more competition, that allows for renters to have an upper hand in some of those
So,
negotiations.
So how do we do that and protect our environment and protect the beauty of Vermont? I mean, I know they're looking at, or they have already recreated Act 250, which
Right.
I love Act 250. I am actually a redeveloper and I love that.
Sure.
I love that act. So so the way to do it is you believe is to just build more housing and to make sure that we have more stock.
I think we can protect the environment and build housing.
Okay.
We've got to address the simple fact in our downtowns, especially in downtown Burlington. I mean, you've been a part of those important efforts for many years. And I know there's ongoing work with the Let's Build Homes movement and other efforts to actually upzone where it is possible and to build some of those rental units as well as units for home ownership. To me, it's an entree of all types of housing, and it's about finding ways to fit the character of our neighborhoods. And the beauty is that we can actually meet a significant portion of our housing goals just in our downtowns, and not even have to touch many other parts of Vermont. We can protect the natural environment of Vermont, but build up where it is possible. And the reforms to Act 250 really do lay that out. There are areas of the state where we're not going to touch whatsoever. And I think it's important to recognize that. But it's in our rural areas, in many instances, this is often a matter of just adding a few more housing units, 5, 10, 15 more units, so that their local school can stay open. Their
Here,
local hospital can have,
right.
or their community health center can stay open. It's about bringing us back to population levels that were just around even 2005 or 2010. It's not about mass development,
I hear
especially
you.
in
Yeah.
rural areas. And that I think is really important to recognize
Can we,
because until we do that, we're not going to be able to address the property tax crisis.
right. And that's really important because people are getting priced out of living here.
Yep.
And kids are leaving. Our young people are leaving. They're saying, why should I stay here? Healthcare, Vermont's healthcare system is in crisis. I support universal healthcare for all. We only have 16 minutes here. I've got 5 pages left. Are you a supporter of universal healthcare? I could talk to you for hours, but are
I
you a
think we
supporter of
could.
universal healthcare?
I strongly support universal health
Good.
care. On the federal level, I am the biggest champion of Medicare for all, single payer. But here in Vermont, I think we can make some important strides towards universal health care by enacting a version of universal primary care.
Yes. Let's
You
get
know,
that passed. Yep.
let's get that passed, and let's get
Come
a
on.
financing study. Let's figure out how much it's going to cost. We are, as you point out, we're on track to be spending billions of dollars if
It's
we do nothing.
disgusting.
If we
It's
do
really
nothing, this
so
money is already going
unfair.
to be taken out of our pockets if we do nothing.
And
Why
people, and we
not?
have to support, I think we have to support small clinics and not, I think it's been so monopolized by one group and they've been buying, I just think, anyway, that's a good. Yeah, universal health care, Medicare for all, primary care for all, Dr. Dinosaur, primary care, I got it. So Vermont property taxes, we talked about this, are going through the roof. I'm going to pass on that. We've talked about prison reform. I personally think we should shut down the women's prison. And for nonviolent people, women, I think we should buy up Sterling College and send them to college and allow them to be with their children and their families.
Yes.
And then you and I
Yes.
go down and we volunteer to provide education, to help them learn about finances and how to be entrepreneurs. And we get to go down and be with them and to make this a loving and a supportive. So women's prison, boo-hoo. So I'm assuming you're right there here too.
Let me just say one thing on that, which is that many of the women in that facility should not be there. because
No kidding.
they should
No
not be there.
kidding.
They should not. And
Be
so
done with it.
I think that to me I love the idea of having some of those offenders be in another place where they can get education and job training and support and be with their families, and address some of their challenges. There are a handful of folks who need a more secure confinement,
Absolutely.
but
And you know what?
that's not
And
the majority of
and Nikhil,
folks.
you want to know something? They're there, many of them, because of the men they slept with. A
I was
lot of these women are
I
there
was
because they loved men who who ended up in prison and they got dragged into it. So
I
now I'm
was well. Let me just say
okay.
really quickly
Yep.
on that. Many of the women prisoners in general in this country are often victims of severe levels of domestic
Domestic
violence,
abuse.
and so
Absolutely.
many of their crimes are often the result of the trauma and the abuse that were inflicted on themselves by those individuals. And so it's not just a simple tale that the media often likes to portray about women prisoners in particular.
Unbelievable. So I suggest the next time a big college comes up for sale, we buy it and we turn it into a
I
place
love the idea. I
for
love the
women,
idea.
and I'll help raise the money, and we'll do a beautiful school for these women, these nonviolent women who are there, who need to have a life and have their children with them. All right.
Yes,
So, do you
absolutely.
believe that Vermont does enough for our disabled community once they age out of the system?
It's a great question. I haven't examined that in great detail, and so I'd love to learn
Okay.
more about it. I do know that one thing I have heard on the campaign trail is that we don't have enough housing for folks who are disabled and need special accommodations. And folks say, for example, if you're a parent of a disabled child that is older and needs somewhere else to live, not in the home, are there enough options? And I do not think there are. And so to me, I definitely want to learn about some of those issues. I've looked at those challenges more so in the public education system at the younger years, but very keen
And
to
Vermont does a
look in
great
the
job
community.
in the younger years, but I have a grandson who's 21 who's now moving out of the system. And
Hmm.
but anyway, beyond. We'll get into that. Talk to me about that. So I wanted to talk to you about immigration reform and ICE imprisonment. Um, but I know where you are with that. The suppression of the vote in 2026 and the fear that the current US administration will rig the outcome. I'm concerned about that. And just this week, you showed up for students at Essex High School who were protesting ICE. Um, Thank you for doing that. Thank you for
I'm
being
just
there.
happy to be in solidarity with them. They are the real
That
uh,
was, you were a
heroes of this.
leader. You were a leader of this generation. So then I wanted to just move in because I'm running out of time and I hate running out of time with you. The Epstein horror show. It highlights the power of the rich and famous. How do you see this playing out over the next few months? And do you believe that Trump and his cronies will eventually be held to account for their crimes?
It is just horrifying to watch this drip, drip, drip of coverage of uh, one email after another depicting abuse and impunity
Torture.
on behalf of our public officials and some of the most powerful people in this world. To me, it is exposed such a deep rot that lies at our in our institutions that allow for the cover up of mass sexual abuse and violence. I mean, that is just
And
the most
murder.
horrifying thing on full display
Yeah.
with the most wealthy men in the world preying on little children. I
Uh,
mean, it is to me, it encapsulates the moment that we're in. And frankly, I know a number of folks have been using the term Epstein class. That is not just about what has happened to these young girls and women. It's also it expands beyond that to what the Epstein class is doing to all of us in
right.
terms
Here,
of
here.
eroding our democracy, corrupting our political system, driving down our wages, throwing people out of off of healthcare. I mean, this is a class that needs to absolutely be exposed, dismantled, and frankly, taken out of office. Many of them, they don't deserve to have the power that they have
Here,
today.
here. And you're leading that fight with your generation. So I want to move on quick to Trump is killing our planet by reducing regulations through industry. One of your generation's biggest issues of all of them, I believe, is the planet you all will be living on in 30, 40, 50 years. So, what are your fears? As I know you must have some. And how do we take back logic and science from an administration hell bent on destroying our species' future on Earth?
I was in Louisiana last year, and I was driving to Baton Rouge, and I drove through Cancer Alley, which is the most horrifying sight and smells. I mean, it's just the smell of the most toxic chemicals and and toxins out there on this drive, and that is what America could become if we don't act on climate, if we don't actually hold polluters and corporations accountable for their emissions and their practices.
Toxins too.
Toxins. I mean,
I
just
mean,
breathing toxins in the air as
Vermont
you're.
passed the Toxic Act, which got rid of all these toxins and
Yeah.
putting all these toxins, these agricultural toxins, back into our food.
Absolutely. I mean, that if one of the things that we ought to do is look at what Europe has done for many years. They have much stronger regulations about what goes into our food. And I think there's a clear relationship between that and why many of those communities are much healthier than
Oh,
Americans. So that's an area that we could definitely try to address. I
well,
imagine that's more on the federal level. I haven't looked at that on the state level, but
well,
I,
protect it
yeah,
be the
protect in Vermont.
protector of
Yeah.
our, yeah, of
I
that.
I was just going to add one thing about climate, which was that there are important measures that we can take as a state to reduce our emissions, particularly around solar energy. Let's make all roofs solar ready.
Bernie said that 30 years ago.
30
Bernie
years
said
ago.
every house should have a solar panel on it. Well, come
Absolutely.
on.
Like there's this debate about putting solar panels on agricultural land and other places in Vermont. Why not have every roof be solar ready?
Exactly.
All new commercial buildings.
Bravo. Bravo.
I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer, and find easy ways that are already part of changing the building code for new construction. Obviously, we want to make sure that housing is not expensive and you don't add extra costs, but we can address both the housing crisis and the energy crisis at the same time if we have some
Absolutely. And
political will.
Bernie's right there. So as we come to the end of the show, what are your words of wisdom for our youth? And you are just 31. I mean,
I'm 30 actually.
you're just 30. I mean,
Give me a few more months, I'll be 31.
well, it's just remarkable, all that you have done in in the short life that you've
No,
had.
likewise. I mean,
Um,
we're all in this collective fight together. So I'm a great admirer of yours and all that
oh,
you
I
have.
know, but I'm 75 years old, so
We're we're st- we're
when
we're
I try
carrying
to
on
think,
your traditions and your legacy as well. So,
but I don't even want to tell you what I was doing at 31. So you are a leader of this generation, and I see so, and those coming after you, so many young people, including my grandchildren, are feeling hopeless and deep despair. How do you buoy them up and give them the strength to endure and change what many of us in this country believe is a hostile takeover of our democracy, liberties, freedoms, and rights?
Mm. So it's a beautiful question, and to me, it's the most existential question of our time. Um, I often think about history and the struggles and challenges previous generations of Americans had to endure, whether it was the horrors of slavery or Jim Crow, or fascism and Nazism, or the AIDS epidemic, the
Women's
Iraq
right,
War,
women's
women's
reproductive
rights,
rights.
the fight for reproductive justice, or the right to vote, the right to have to right to divorce, to have control over one's life. I mean, these are all these Americans had to go up against some of the most powerful forces in this country, and many of them were able to win because they engaged in collective struggle and action. And I think that's why I was so proud to stand with these Essex students because they are carrying that torch. It's on all of us to carry that torch. But especially our young people because they're seeing injustice. They're seeing mothers get shot in the face, get a nurse getting executed in cold blood, children being kidnapped and thrown into cages, torture chambers, sent to foreign gulags. I mean, children today understand. They are not dumb. They are extremely aware and knowledgeable, and they are learning. And so to me, it's really important that we support our young people, help them understand what's happening, support them, stand in solidarity with them. That's the most important thing we can do as adults. Are they going to get it right every time? No. But we were once in those positions as
Right.
well as kids. And it's important, though, that we stand with them, that we show them our support, because it takes all of us to defeat these reactionary authoritarian forces that are coming for our lives, our democracy, and our rights. And I'm just proud to be in this fight with you and so many others.
Well, bless your heart. So, in conclusion, you are in many ways a Vermont superstar. You have been highlighted in some of the nation's most influential publications. You have written 3 books and received an honor from the New Yorker. You are the go-to person during times of trouble and strife. Do you see yourself someday on the national stage for political reform?
I want to in the future. I definitely want to be involved in some form of public policy and advocacy. I think right now it's been really wonderful to really get involved in some of these thorny, most complex state issues, and obviously those have national implications. I'm running on a pretty bold agenda around universal primary care and banning social media for children under age of 16, taking on big tech. These are issues that if Vermont can show they can work, then the rest of the country can follow. I'm also deeply involved in juvenile justice issues, working on a new book on that. And that is an area where there are many reforms that could be codified into law on the federal level, as well as individual states. So, I just want to be able to contribute through my research, through my writing, and my advocacy in some way, and that's what I hope to do for as long as I can.
And you're doing it, and you're doing it, and you're only 30. I mean, it's extraordinary. I cannot tell you how much I admire you. I am a huge fan, and I delight watching you make your way through the thorns and pitfalls of humanity in crisis with wisdom way beyond your age and an intellect that cuts through the weeds and weaves sense and practicality into solutions. Thank you, Nikhil Goyal. Thank you for being on my show, and thank you for running for the Vermont Senate. I wish you well, my friend.
Oh, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I'm so grateful for you and all that you stand for and
Thank you.
your kindness and your warmth. And so I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. And to my viewers, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you shortly. Bye bye.